What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And as always, we have ourselves a jam-packed show as we have a lot to get into, such as the Inland Empire Matadors and the Puerto Rico Pythons. They got the job done as they are playoff bound within their respectable conference. Not bad for the Pythons and not bad for the Matadors considering they had the deck stacked against them. Also, the U.S. clinched the top seed in the VNL men's side of things. How did they do it, and what was it like having the VNL in Anaheim? Also, the AVP had not one, but two tournaments this week as the AVP went to Waupaca and Hermosa Beach. Which pairs came out on top on the men's and women's side? Also, the Big 12 released its preseason polls as, is anybody going to challenge Texas this year? Or is Texas going to be tearing through the conference like it has been in the last few years? So hand me a volleyball. Set to end, because I'm about to serve you up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday afternoon, Monday evening. Either way, you've made your way into episode 202 of Set Point. And without any further delay, let's do this. But first and foremost, Set Point would not be where it's at without IE Sports Radio providing the platform to go live on Spreaker. Please do follow IE Sports Radio on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at IE Sports Radio, and do follow them on Facebook for those that still use that social media platform. Just type in the word IE, then sports, then radio in the search bar, see our icon or logo, and then boom, just like us, and that's how you're able to follow us on Facebook. We also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com, and when you go there, you'll see all 30 of our shows, including this one, Set Point. In addition, our website includes our blog page, our Hall of Fame, and our merchandise shop. And when you go to our merchandise shop, you will see t-shirts, tank tops, caps, and hoodies, with more items to be included in the near future. Because for the past 9 years and counting, IE Sports Radio has been bringing you amazing content ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel, to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, we've been continuing to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we are ready to take the next biggest step. Thank you to everyone for all of your support and for making IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that sports. I appreciate every one of my supporters, especially for Set Point. Without you, this show would not amount to much, and thank you to everyone who has supported IE Sports Radio, because without you, we would not be doing what we're doing. Without any further delay, let's get started. So we have to start with the NVA, as this was Event 5. This was basically the final event and the final event of the regular season. It's basically the final frontier. Win or go home. There was only one spot remaining in either conference in terms of the playoffs, as 3 spots were already claimed in both conferences, the National and the American Conference. And I do want to give a shout out to Larry B and Adam Kronk in the chat room, as Larry B both say good evening, and Larry B says, let's go Matadors. And Adam Kronk says he loved the guy who wore the luchador mask. He actually was referring to Jose Malero of the Texas Tyrants. He was referring to him in terms of the NVA All-Star match, which was on Saturday. I will get into that a little bit later, but for right now, let's get on into Friday's matches. So the first match actually was the Las Vegas Ramblers taking on the Inland Empire Matadors. So the first set, the Ramblers obviously were the Ramblers, but I have to give credit to the Matadors. They made the Ramblers work late in that set, but eventually the Ramblers took that first set 25-23. Jalen Penrose was obviously his strong and dominant self with 5 kills. Felix Chapman and Kevin Voss obviously backed him up. The Matadors had this new player named James Norris. Now, if you're not putting 2 plus 2 together, this James Norris fellow is actually J.R. Norris IV, a former UCLA men's volleyball player who just recently won the national championship with the Bruins last spring. So the fact that the Matadors just added him is actually a big bonus. And honestly, the Matadors do need some depth. Not that they're not deep right now, but they did have a lot of good talent on their team, such as Eric Beattie and Jacob Vanderbeek, but they lost those two to, ironically enough, the Ramblers. And then the second set, the Ramblers took that set 25-19, as once again, Jalen Penrose was just doing his thing. Even though he didn't really have the service aces, he was just so strong offensively. And J.R. Norris IV, I will give him credit. He looked really good in his NVA debut. Coming from college and having been removed, he won the national championship in May against Hawaii, and it's already July, so that's probably, let's say, 3 months removed from playing volleyball. Mike C, or a.k.a. Mikey Two Guns, the host of our Bleepin' City, our Boston show, pops into the chat room. He says, did you do the USA-Bulgaria recap? No, I have not done that. I just started, and I'm doing the NVA. And then the third set, the Ramblers, they basically took the third set. They had a little bit of trouble, but the Matadors just could not take down the Ramblers, as the Ramblers took the third set 25-21 and the match. Ramblers didn't even have a player go over 10 kills, as I don't even think Penrose played in the third set. So they did have Kevin Voss adding 5 kills, and then Felix Chapman having 4 kills. Gert Lisha was the one that was setting, as they did not have Matt West available for this event. So for the Ramblers, that was basically how they won. And Ryan Manoogian, their libero, was honestly doing great. And he's been their rock in terms of their libero, and he has that veteran mentality and that veteran leadership. And the fun fact about Ryan Manoogian is that he's actually deaf. If you know Ryan Manoogian, because I actually covered him back when he was in junior college at Orange Coast College, he actually is deaf, and I actually did a little bit of a feature on him. So honestly, I really think that he does bring a lot of veteran mentality and a lot of veteran leadership to the Ramblers. And I think this is his, I want to say his 4th year on the Ramblers. Because I remember him back in 2020 when I first started getting into the NVA altogether, and then he's still been on the Ramblers ever since. And then for the Matadors, J.R. Norris IV led the Matadors with 12 kills, while Cesar Medina added 5 kills. Unfortunately, it just was not the day for the Matadors, as they were now in the situation of if the Florida Southern Exposure won, they would be out of the playoffs. But they were basically just hoping that the Ramblers needed to take down the Exposures so they could force a win-in match on Sunday. This was on Friday, so it was basically just a wait-and-see game. Next matchup we had was the San Diego Wild taking on the Utah Stingers. The Wild took the first set 25-21. Now, you're probably wondering how the Stingers got stomped on in that first set. Well, the Stingers did not have a whole lot of their offensive firepower, as they didn't have Sam Coburn, Kevin Coburn, they didn't have Patrick Paragas. They had to start Reed Chilton at setter. So, unfortunately, the Stingers were without a good portion of their team, but they did have the likes of Jorge Mencia. They had Mikhail Hoyt, a.k.a. Zebra. That's what we call him nowadays. They had Inavel Ramiro. Then they had Chandler Baugh, who also was taking swings. But the Stingers really missed most of their top guys. And it got to the point where Russell Holmes, their head coach and their owner, he had to suit up. And for those that don't know who Russell Holmes is, he actually, well, obviously he's the player. He's actually the coach and owner of the Stingers. But he's a former USA men's volleyball player and a former BYU standout. And he even told me that he has no intentions of playing this year. He's done playing volleyball. He wants to pass the torch off to the young kids. Anyway, so the Wild, they had some of their firepower with Matt Kinigi, Lior Schiffer, Uchenna Ofoa. They had all those guys. They were really swinging for the fences. And then the second set, the Wild got a little bit of a challenge from the Stingers, but the Wild took that second set 25-23 as Matt Kinigi led them with... Well, actually, no, it was Lior Schiffer leading the way with 9 kills. Matt Kinigi had 6 kills. Everyone on that team that was playing, or they had 5 guys with 4 more kills. Meanwhile, for the Stingers, Inavel Ramiro had 6 kills through 2 sets. And I was basically thinking, well, it looks like the Wild are in control. Because the thing for the Wild is they needed to basically win out. And Nick England basically told me this in an interview. Well, not an interview, but a post-game interview or interview via the last scrimmage. He said it all depends on who wins their matches in a few amount of sets. So Wild were up 2-0, and all they just need is one more win in terms of a set, and then they just need to worry about the Philadelphia Founders, which they were the worst team in the NVA. So in the third set, the Stingers kind of spread their wings, no pun intended, and they kind of came alive as they took that third set 25-21. It was close for the most part, but the Stingers finally came alive as Inavel Ramiro was swinging for the fences. Jorge Mencia did really well. Mikhail Hoyt added 3 blocks to go along with his 5 kills, and Fabian Rohena, he was kind of an under-the-cover weapon. And Chandler Ball also had some good swings as well. He didn't even have a hitting error as well. And he also had 2 service aces. So the Stingers were starting to basically put pressure on the Wild. And this was kind of concerning because now the Wild had lost a set. And now their hopes of maybe clinching the top seed in the American Conference were a little bit in jeopardy. Then the fourth set, the Wild also came alive to basically win that set, but it was also tight. It was another tight set as Stingers had to fight tooth and nail, or in this case, stinger and leg, to basically take that set as they won it 25-23. And just like that, the two teams were going 5 sets as Inavel Ramiro had 19 kills through those 4 sets, as he added 6 in that fourth set alone. Jorge Mencia had 12 kills. Mikhail Hoyt had 8 kills. Lior Schiffer was still leading the way with 17 kills, while Matt Kinigi had 11 kills. Sam Bergie had 9 kills. So, for the most part, this was the offensive success for both of these teams, but for the Stingers, they were really coming alive. And for the Wild, this meant that they were not going to get the full 3 points that they would have gotten had they beaten the Stingers in 3 or 4 sets. Now they were basically going to be 1 point short, even if they had won. Which, I'm about to tell you, the Stingers wound up completing the comeback. The Stingers jumped out to an 8-1 lead, and they never looked back, as they won the 5th set 15-10, and they completed the reverse sweep over the Wild. So the Wild's chances of getting the top seed in the American Conference took a huge hit. And more importantly, the Stingers actually pulled even within the American Central Conference, as that was a big win for the Stingers. And that's probably their biggest win of the season, as Russell Holmes even said it best, that is their biggest win of the season, most likely, and it's more of a morale victory, because once the Ramblers beat the Matadors, the Stingers were locked in as the 3 seed, no matter what, and they were basically going to be locked in to being either the 3 or the 2, regardless of who was going to come out on top of their conference. But the Stingers were led by Inavel Ramiro, who had 22 kills. I got to interview him as man of the match. That can be found on the Instagram page. Keep in mind that the Stingers only had 8 players, so the fact that they reverse swept the Wild, a really good team, is very impressive. Jorge Mencia also added 16 kills. Mikhail Hoyt was plus 12. He had 8 kills, only 1 hitting error, and he had 4 blocks and 1 service ace, which is very impressive. The Wild were led by Lior Schiffer, who had 19 kills, And then Matt Knigge had 13 kills. Sam Burgee and Joel Auerkamp each had 9 kills. Uchenna Afoa, 7 kills to go along with 1 block. But the Wild just fell short. And then the next match on Friday's docket was the Orange County Stunners taking on the New Jersey Freedom. The first set, the Freedom came out swinging, and they came into play as, you have to remember, the Stunners came in having won 6 in a row, but their only loss came at the hands of the New Jersey Freedom. And that was back in Event 1, where practically no one had their full roster. But the Freedom looked like they were the better team in that first set, as they took it 25-20, and they weren't even at full strength themselves, as they didn't have their libero John Cunningham, and they had to use Sam Schuldenberg as their libero. Second set, the Stunners took that 30-28, and that was a huge second set that they won. If the Stunners don't take that set, then they're on their heels being down 0-2, just like they were in the first match. And honestly, that could have been very disastrous. And Joe Norman obviously was Joe Norman, and Jared Ray obviously did great things for the Freedom. The two had 18 kills with a combined 2 hitting errors. And Tim Ferreter, I gotta make note of him. He had 3 service aces and 5 kills, so he really did wonders for the Freedom. Matt Hilling also did his thing for the Stunners, and then Corey Chavers also had a good night through 2 sets. Third set, the Stunners took that set 25-18. That's kind of not surprising just because the Stunners are indeed a good team. On paper, the Stunners should beat the Freedom, but I will also say that the Stunners, they looked a little uncharacteristic in this match. And I will say that if you saw my interview with Matt Prosser, he kind of had a few choice words. It obviously wasn't bad or mean, but let's just say Matt Prosser told it like it is. So through 3 sets, the Freedom were led by Jared Ray, who had 13 kills, as Joe Norman was kind of halted in his tracks. And then the Stunners had Matt Hilling and Corey Chavers in double digits in terms of kills, as Chavers was really starting to come alive. Spencer Olivier and Grant Maroki also helped the fray, as the Stunners were now 1 set away from getting the full 3 points. But the Freedom was able to push this to a 5th set, as they took set 4 25-23, as Jared Ray was still going off. 18 kills, and then Joe Norman had 12 kills. And then the Stunners, it was still basically the two-headed monster in Corey Chavers and Matt Hilling. But then in the 5th set, it was actually a tight 5th set. And then midway through the first half of the first set, or the 5th set, the Freedom's libero, Sam Schuldenberg, he actually gets hit in the head off of an overpass kill, and he actually had to go out, and he was not his libero-like self. And eventually, the Freedom did not really rebound after that. I mean, they still scrapped their way to basically staying with the Stunners, but at 11-11, the Stunners wound up winning the next 4 points to taking set number 5, 15-11, and that was how the Stunners wound up winning their division outright. I mean, they were basically the division champs no matter what had happened, but honestly, this win was basically the icing on the cake. But like I said, Matt Prosser was not happy with this win. I mean, obviously, the Stunners won, but they only got 2 points out of it, meaning the only way the Tyrants would basically relinquish the top seed is if they lost to either the Los Angeles Blaze or the Chicago Untouchables. As for the final stats, Matt Hilling and Corey Chavers each had 18 kills, while Grant Maroki had 6 kills, Spencer Olivier had 5 kills. Chavers had a whopping 7 service aces, and that was big time right there. He was huge, and Matt Hilling was the man of the match, as he had plus 13, but I could also give it to Corey Chavers. See, what really goes into the process for man of the match in terms of the NVA is basically the plus minus, and then you also have other factors as well. And then you also have to deal with the great passing percentages and whatnot. So, there's a lot of process that goes into that. I'm glad I'm not part of the NVA broadcast crew and part of the NVA statisticians and whatnot. And then for the New Jersey Freedom, Jared Ray led the way with 20 kills. Joe Norman had 12 kills, which I kind of feel he got slowed down after that second set. Tim Ferder, he had 8 kills and still had 3 service aces, but it wasn't enough as the Freedom dropped another 5-set loss. At that point, they had 4 5-set losses. 4 5-set losses. Now, a lot of them were to quality teams, such as the Ramblers and the Tyrants and now the Stunners. I mean, you could also throw the Florida Southern Exposure there, but honestly, the Ramblers, Tyrants, and Stunners, those are your top 3 teams, and those are probably the favorites to win, as Mikey Two Guns basically said, who are your favorites to win all this year? Probably those 3 teams that I just mentioned. And maybe the San Diego Wild. But for the Freedom, it's just been that rough of a season in terms of trying to win 5-set matches. I mean, they don't really have too many bad matches. They just have had bad luck matches. But that's just how it is sometimes. Like last year, they won every match that went 5 sets. But now this year, it's been the complete flip-flop. And now for the last match of Day 1 of Event 5 is the Chicago Untouchables and the Los Angeles Blaze. But first, we have some breaking news as I, Teran Rodriguez, am your one-stop shop for all that is NVA news. And this actually happened before that match. And this actually happened during event number 5 and day number 1. And I was wondering where the Untouchables and the Blaze are because I was thinking, don't we have one more match to deal with? And then I asked one of the head honchos of the NVA, and he said, and I'm like, don't we have Untouchables Blaze going on? And then he basically straight up told me, no, Untouchables didn't show up again. So that was it. And unfortunately, with the Untouchables not showing up, the Blaze wound up winning by default. So they basically won 25-0, 25-0, 25-0, and they get the full 3 points. Meanwhile, for the Untouchables, they took another loss, and with that loss, they were officially eliminated from the NVA playoff contention. And they were actually the first team officially eliminated from playoff contention. So that's basically the worst way to go out if you're the Untouchables. And it's really sad because the Untouchables have so much potential. They actually have a lot of talent with Joshua Blair, Daniel Venegas, Andrew Kohut before his injury. Like, this team was looking very interesting through its first 5 matches. Yes, they got reverse swept by the Utah Stingers, but they took the Stunners to 4 sets. They could have easily taken that team to 5, but being the Stunners, they are obviously basically, they're just that good. So, unfortunately, the Untouchables, they had some unfortunate and unseen circumstances, which I'm going to use those 2 words again. I can't get into the full-on details, but sadly, the Untouchables just did not show up just because of unseen and unfortunate details. So, again, I can't go over that just because I could get in trouble, we could get in trouble, the NVA can get in trouble, more importantly, I can get in trouble. And yes, Bishop, that is wild to just not show up. Especially when the Blaze are basically, they're fighting for their playoff spot, but they are in a crapshoot to try to make the playoffs. All you just needed was 7 guys, pretty much. But unfortunately, that was not the case. So, that's unfortunate for the Untouchables, but the Blaze basically lived to fight another day in terms of their playoff hopes. Day 2 of event number 5. First and foremost, we had the Puerto Rico Pythons taking on the New Jersey Freedom. Wild first set, which went to the Pythons 30-28, as Jair Santiago was the one that wasn't leading the way. It was actually Ricky Vega who had 5 kills. And then there were 2 other guys with 4 kills each, with that being Santiago and Ivan Fernandez. Then the second set, the Freedom woke up they took that second set 25-16 as Joe Norman was being Joe Norman with 10 kills. I'm just going to also say this. It really sucks that Joe Norman did not make the NVA All-Star team. I think he was a huge snub because the dude, obviously he missed one event, which really hurt his chances. But I will also say this. He is just a talent unmatched. He's only 29, and I hope we can still have a few more good years of Joe Norman. Adam Karnick pops into the chat room. He says, I wish I had a witty comeback to defend the honor of the greatest team name in the NBA. Alas, I have none. Yeah, it's tough. There's no defending that, unfortunately. Ooh. And then, jumping on over to the third set, the Freedom took that third set 25-20, and Joe Norman, he was still doing his thing. He had 7 kills in that third set, and basically the Freedom, they were locked in as the 3 seed of their conference. They couldn't finish any higher than 3, and they couldn't go any lower than 3. And they were most likely they were going to take on the Stunners most likely, unless the Blaze were to upset the Tyrants. Meanwhile, the Pythons, they were fighting for their playoff lives, but all they really needed was just 1 point. And then in the fourth set, it was pretty dramatic. The Freedom actually had match point, could not take advantage of it, and then the Pythons had a set point of their own, and then they took advantage of it, getting a service ace, and just like that, the two teams are going 5 sets, as the Pythons took the fourth set 26-24. More importantly, the Pythons earned a point. So for those that are keeping track, if you go 5 sets in the NVA, both teams get at least 1 point. And that's what the Pythons needed at the very least. They needed 1 point at the very least, and they were in the playoffs. So the Pythons managed to get into the playoffs, and even if they didn't win this match, they were still in. And in the fifth set, none of it really mattered for the Pythons. They actually did get washed in that fifth set 15-8, but all of that did not matter as the Pythons are in the playoffs. They clinched the final playoff spot in the National Conference as they basically are the last team in. And that also meant the Los Angeles Blaze are out of the postseason contention as the Blaze needed a lot to go their way. As the Blaze basically needed to sweep the Tyrants, and they also needed the Pythons to have lost in straight sets to the Freedom and the Stunners, which was not going to happen. As for the final stats, the Freedom were led by Joe Norman, who had 24 kills. He also had 2 service aces and 2 blocks. Jared Ray had 13 kills and 4 blocks. The Pythons were led by Jair Santiago, who had 17 kills and 3 blocks. Ivan Fernandez had 9 kills. All in all, the Pythons put forth a great effort, and I will say this is kind of their first... Oh no, it's their second 5-set match. They went 5 in Event 1 in their first ever match against the Orange County Stunners, and wound up losing that one in 5. So they haven't had a 5th set match in a while, as the Freedom have had 5-set matches all over the place. This was their 5th 5-set match, and they finally, hence the word finally, won a 5-set match, as the Freedom ended the season 6-4, but that was a very competitive 6-4 record, as they also earned 21 points, which is pretty good. Now they have the postseason to look forward to. Mikey Two Guns, or Mike C, asks in the chat room, who's your pick to win it all? I will get into that a little bit later. Matter of fact, I'm actually not going to get into that just because I'm going to get into that once the NVA playoffs, the week of the NVA playoffs. And Mike Pat pops into the chat room. He says, Teran, good evening, sir. Good evening to you too, brother. Thank you for popping into the chat room. Next up, we have the Florida Southern Exposure taking on the Las Vegas Ramblers. Long story short for the Ramblers, if they win, they're the top seed. If the Florida Southern Exposure wins, they're in the playoffs. First set, the Ramblers really came to play. They took it 25-19 as they didn't even have one player surpassing 3 kills. And Sam Jackman of the Exposure had 6 kills. It was basically the Exposure. The Exposure just did not have the answer for the balanced attack for the Ramblers. They just had Sam Jackman. It was basically feed the ball to Sam Jackman, and he puts it down. Then the second set, it was a whole different story as Zach Meyer started to basically get hot from the court. Sam Jackman was basically doing his thing. The serving started to get a little bit hot from the service line. And surprisingly, the Ramblers took out Jalen Penrose. Now, that is the account of resting Jalen Penrose for the NVA All-Star match. And also, the Ramblers did not play Ryan Manoogian at libero. They actually started Jonathan Carlson at libero. So that was kind of a flip-flop right there. Probably rest for the playoffs and whatnot, just so you don't risk losing your players before the actual true match that truly matters. But the Exposure took the second set 25-22, and now the match was even at 1-1. Then the third set, the Ramblers really turned on the gas, and then they eventually wound up winning that third set 25-20. I want to say that the Ramblers did put back Jalen Penrose. I know they put him back late in the second set, but I know they put him back in this match, or later in this match, and then they eventually saw him stepping it up, as they also got contributions from Felix Chapman, Jacob Vanderbeek. We even got to see a little bit of Kyler Presho in the middle, as well as Kevin Vaz. Colton Cowell was doing his thing as well. And then the fourth set, it was just all Ramblers, all Las Vegas Ramblers, and it was just basically a fun fest. Jalen Penrose was serving strong. Felix Chapman was doing his thing. And eventually the Ramblers took the fourth set 25-17. And they locked up the number one seed in the American Conference. But Miguel Monterola, their head coach, actually said that the top seed in the conference doesn't really make too much of a difference. Which is understandable. You're eventually going to have to play the best teams in the playoffs eventually. So, for the Exposure, this means now they have to beat the Matadors on Sunday if they want to make the playoffs. As the Exposure were led by Sam Jackman, who had 15 kills. Zach Meyer had 8 kills. Ramblers were led by Jalen Penrose, 13 kills, 4 aces, 2 blocks. Felix Chapman had 12 kills, 5 aces, and 4 blocks. It was just that was basically it. Their two-headed monster. Oh, also Jacob Vanderbeek had 5 kills and 1 block. Next matchup we had was Texas Tyrants versus Los Angeles Blaze. The Blaze were basically just fighting for glory. This was basically a for pride matchup for them, just because they found out earlier that the Pythons wound up taking a point from their match against the New Jersey Freedom, and unfortunately that meant that the Blaze were out of the playoff running. For the Tyrants, they basically needed to win this match, and they were the number one seed in the National Conference. Because you also got to remember that the Untouchables sadly did not show up for this event, which means that their other match on Sunday against the Texas Tyrants was also a forfeit. Meaning the Tyrants also got the full 3 points, and they got the win against the Untouchables. So all the Tyrants just needed to do was beat the Blaze, and that was how they were to get the number one seed. First set, the Tyrants just looked like the Tyrants. They won the first set 25-20, as they didn't even need to have their entire team having more than 6 kills. Their entire team had 6 kills through the first set. Like, the Blaze had more kills as a team through that first set. It's wild when you think about it. It's just so crazy when you think about it. And then the second set, Tyrants stepped up their kill game, but they eventually took that second set 25-20, as they had 3 different players with 5 kills through 2 sets. But like I said, they were just throwing up a block party. They had 8 blocks through 2 sets to the Blaze's 3 blocks. And then the third set, they just wound up winning it 25-18. There was just not much to really discuss, as even though they didn't have Tanner Maxwell, Chris Hall really set the ball well for the Tyrants. And the Tyrants could be a really dangerous team if they have their full team. They did have Ryan Mather, who they did not have in event number 4, the previous event. And that's crucial right there. You need to have Ryan Mather and Jake Langlois, which they both were available. And Austin Matautia, Jose Malero obviously was there. So honestly, having those guys was big time right there. And we'll see what happens with the Tyrants going forward. It's all about availability for them. If they have their players available, they're going to be rolling over the competition. And that also meant that the Tyrants were locked in as the 1 seed, as they will be playing the Puerto Rico Pythons, while the Orange County Stunners were locked in as the 2 seed, and they will be playing the New Jersey Freedom. And yeah, I did say that the Tyrants basically won the number 1 seed by default, but that's kind of only because the Untouchables just did not show up, and that's kind of the most interesting way to basically word it. It's just such a tough situation. I just really wish that the Untouchables could have played the Tyrants, but that's just a sticky situation. I don't want to say, since the Untouchables did not show up, you guys won the conference. Like, I just don't want to say that in a demeaning sort of way in terms of hurting the Untouchables and whatnot. Then next up we had, the last match of the day in terms of official matches. We had the San Diego Wild taking on the Philadelphia Founders. Long story short for the Wild, they were locked in as the 2 seed, and they couldn't really go lower than the 3 seed. The Founders basically needed a lot to go their way in order to make the playoffs. And basically, if the Founders dropped 2 sets in this match to the Wild, they were out of the playoffs. And it also did not help that the Founders only had 7 guys. So the Wild took the first set 25-19 as Joel Auerkamp had 6 kills. This was a match where Nick England actually did not play his best guys, as he was saving them for the All-Star match. He was saving Uchenna Afoa, as well as Brandon Rattray and a few other guys for the All-Star match, and as well as Lior Schiffer. And yes, this is indeed the set point show. So thank you, Carson. And yes, this is the set point show. And then in the second set, the Wild took that 25-16, as it was just more of the same as, I will just say, the San Diego Wild, I think, did not hold back. I don't think they were looking back on their 5-set loss to the Stingers, and they knew they were trying to just get back on track and get some momentum going into the playoffs. And then the third set, like I said, this is just like the Tyrants Blaze match. This is basically, there was not much to discuss with this matchup, as the Wild were just serving tough. They really were just strong overall, and honestly, they had other players to cover the bases of Brandon Rattray, Uchenna Afoa, and all the other guys that they just benched. So honestly, the Wild took the third set 25-16, and Joel Auerkamp led the way with 12 kills. He was plus 10 for the match, and that was huge right there. Kendall Ratter had 7 kills. Sam Burgee had 8 kills. Though, unfortunately, he was -3, and he had 5 service errors, and even his dad approached me after the match saying, yeah, he was crap from the service line. And that's no offense to Sam, of course. At least he didn't miss 5 serves in the playoffs. You'd rather miss 5 serves now than miss 5 serves when it truly matters. Anyway, for the Founders, they did not have a player surpassing 5 kills. That's just how unfortunate the season has been for the Founders. They really needed all their guys. It does not help that they have 7 guys available, and also they only have their outside hitter, who is primarily an outside hitter, playing libero. And Caden Satterfield, I definitely feel bad for. I don't think libero is his primary position, and he didn't ask to play libero. He plays outside hitter. I covered Caden Satterfield back when he was at Orange Coast College. Now he is at LIU, or he was at LIU. I don't think he's at LIU, just because you can't go to college and then go to the NVA and then go back to the college. So, yeah. Anyway, so that is that for the Wild Founders match, and that basically clinched a share of the division, but the Wild were locked in as the 2 seed, as they were basically going to get a date with the Stingers regardless. And Nick England said it best. Their 7-3 record, they beat every team that they were supposed to beat. And the losses were actually quality losses. The loss to the Tyrants, that's a pretty good team. Obviously, they're the best team in their conference. The Ramblers, they're the best team in their conference. And then the Stingers, that could have easily been avoided in terms of losing. However, you have to give a lot of credit to the Stingers. They really showed up. Even though they had 8 players, they had the key players that truly mattered the most. And Carson is actually a diehard Ramblers fan, and I definitely think the Ramblers are one of the favorites to win it all, as I think the Ramblers are the favorites to repeat it as champions. As you look at the talent that the Ramblers have, like Jalen Penrose, Felix Chapman, Gert Lisha, Matt West, pick your poison in terms of setter. Ryan Manugian at libero. You basically are playing with fire when you're playing the Ramblers. You have to come prepared, and you have to have a super team of your own. Otherwise, you're basically going to get punched in the mouth multiple times. And Carson says he also likes the Matadors too. So, okay, that's awesome. Anyway, last day of the regular season as Matadors took on the Exposure. I called this match as the match of the weekend. I actually called this as match of the weekend just because if the Matadors and the Exposure lost to the Ramblers, this was basically going to be a win and you're in match. If you lost along the way, well, if you're the Matadors and you lose, and then the Exposure won, well, then the Exposure basically would go into the playoffs. But that was not the case, as both the Matadors and the Exposure lost to the Ramblers, and then the 2 teams played a win and in match. And I basically called this as my match of the weekend. I even basically wrote a matches to watch for article on this, and I basically said if this match somehow is not match of the weekend and it's not a win and in match, then I'm going to look like a complete idiot. Anyway, so the first set for Matadors Exposure. So the Matadors were actually down 23-20 in the first set, but then they rallied back to take the opening set against the Exposure 27-25, as the Matadors had Orlando Rojas, a.k.a. Junior. I don't know why he's called Junior Rojas. Anyway, he led the way with 6 kills in that opening set, and that was a crucial set for the Matadors. If they don't take that first set, Exposure's got to be feeling really good. And then the second set, all these sets early on were tight, and then it eventually boiled down to teams getting runs. So eventually the Matadors kind of rattled off a few points here and there, and they eventually won the set off of a service ace from Rojas, as the Matadors took the second set 25-22. Rojas was still leading the way with 9 kills. J.R. Norris IV had 6 kills. Antonio Anguizola, 5 kills. Exposure had Sam Jackman led the way with 8 kills. Tyler Hubbard-Neal, who was actually questionable to play due to a lower leg injury, actually played, and he had 6 kills. Normally he's a serving sub and a defensive specialist, but then he was looking spry, and he said he told me before the game he felt really good. But unfortunately, the Exposure fell down 0-2, and they were in a very sticky situation. And then they fell down early against the Matadors in set 3, but then Exposure started to work their way back, but then the Matadors seemed to have an answer for the Exposure. I don't know what it was when it came to the Matadors and the Exposure. Maybe because J.R. Norris IV just made an impact and it had to flip the Exposure's game plan, but I don't know. Eventually, the Matadors took the third set off of a walk-off service ace from J.R. Norris IV. only in his first event, and he deals the walk-off service ace as he gave the Matadors the third set, 25-22, and the match as the Matadors clinched the final playoff spot in the American Conference. And they, ladies and gentlemen, are off to the playoffs as they're back in the playoffs for the first time since 2021, as that playoff format was actually an 18 playoff format. Oops. But it was a different playoff format that year. And I think there was only like a handful of teams. I think there was only like 10 teams in the playoff in the NVA as opposed to 12 right now. So Mikey Two Guns, aka Mike C, asks, does the NVA have a draft in the off season? I do not think so. And if anything, I do know that they have an off season and they do sign players from that have like graduated and whatnot. So I do not think they have a draft. I'm 95% certain there is no draft. So anyway, back to the Matadors. They were led by Orlando Jr. Rojas, who had 14 kills, 2 aces. J.R. Norris IV and Luis Lopez each had 7 kills. Antonio Anguizola, 6 kills. For the exposure, Sam Jackman had 11 kills. Zach Meyer, 10 kills. He only had 1 error, by the way. But it wasn't enough as the Matadors are now going to the playoffs. And Larry B said it best. Their biggest test of the season. The Las Vegas Ramblers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your playoff teams. All the playoff seeds have been locked up at that point. The Las Vegas Ramblers take on the Inland Empire Matadors in the American Conference. And then the San Diego Wild take on the Stingers in the American Conference. And then the National Conference, you have the Texas Tyrants taking on the Puerto Rico Pythons. And then you have the Orange County Stunners taking on the New Jersey Freedom. You actually have quite a number of division matchups. You have the Matadors and the Ramblers, and then you also have the Stunners and the Freedom. Those are some pretty darn good first-round matchups. Okay, maybe not... I won't try to say Matadors Ramblers is a bad first-round matchup, but it's an interesting first-round matchup. Now with J.R. Norris IV, can the Matadors be better? Because they've split the season series. But in that first win over the Ramblers, the Matadors faced the Ramblers team that was not at full strength. So, I'm just saying. So the last two matchups didn't really have too much of a great feel, but the next matchup was Philadelphia Founders taking on the Utah Stingers. The Founders took the first set 25-18, but then the Stingers wound up winning the next set 25-23 as the Stingers almost kind of gave that set away, but then they got the job done. Then the Stingers won the third set 25-22, and then the fourth set, the Stingers wound up winning it 25-20, as they also clinched a share of the American Central Division, but it didn't really matter because they're already facing the San Diego Wild in the playoffs. Like, their seed wasn't going to change, even if they had won or lost. They were locked in as the 3 seed, and them clinching at least a share of their division is actually impressive, considering they lost to the Wild. They had that horrible Event 4 where one match they had 7 guys, and then also they only had 8 guys available altogether. So it was a rough weekend for the Stingers, but they have some momentum going into the playoffs. Being 2-0 is rather good, if you ask me. It's very good, if you ask me. So, I really think that the Stingers could be a team to watch for. Stingers Wild is definitely the matchup to watch for. That's another playoff division. That's another divisional matchup within the American Conference. Stingers Wild. Stingers Wild and Freedom Stunners are probably the matchups to watch for. I don't even think there's one truly bad matchup. I think all the playoff matchups are really good. It's just that if I had to rank them, I'd probably say Wild Stingers as the best matchup, and then Stunners Freedom as the second best matchup, then Tyrants Pythons third best matchup, and Ramblers Matadors is the fourth best matchup. I'm not trying to say that the Ramblers Matadors is bad. I'm just saying that the Matadors are facing a lot of really good talent. And when you compare the first matchup to the second matchup, it's practically no contest. Like, Event 1, you don't have your full team, and you don't have an identity. Event 5, you have an identity, you have most of your team, and you basically now know what to do and what to expect. Anyway, the Stingers were led by Inavel Ramiro, who had 16 kills. Chandler Baugh had 9 kills. Founders were led by Brandon Spolnick, who had 18 kills, while Jeff Nelson had 14 kills. Believe it or not, the Stingers only had 39 kills as a team to the Founders' 55 kills, but they still wound up winning. Now for the last match of the regular season, just because Untouchables Tyrants was a forfeit, courtesy of the Untouchables forfeiting. So the Pythons took the first set the Stunners took the first set 29-27 off of I think it was a hitting error from the Pythons. Either way, the Stunners took that opening set 29-27 as Jair Santiago had 9 kills in that opening set, while Damani Lenore had 7 kills. And then in the second set, the Pythons took it 25-23 off of a serving error from the Stunners. The Stunners didn't really play too many of their best guys, like Corey Chavers, as well as Matt Hilling, but they looked pretty good for the most part, as Spencer Olivier was solid, Shane Beamer was solid, Tanner Woods, even though he was missing his serves, he was looking good. And I think, what's-his-face, Matt Prosser kind of shuffled around Damani Lenore after that first set. Then the third set, the Pythons took it 25-23, as the first 3 sets were decided by a whopping 2 points. As Jair Santiago had 20 kills through the first 3 sets, which is just mind-boggling. Spencer Olivier had 10 kills, which that's also pretty good right there, but that's half the kills that Santiago had. And then the fourth set, the Stunners took that set 25-18, and in the fifth set, the Pythons broke a 5-5 tie, and then they eventually wound up winning the fifth set 15-10, and believe it or not, both teams actually scored 110 points combined, so that's kind of your Snapple fun fact right there. But in the end, the Pythons were the ones that came out on top, as the Pythons were led by Jair Santiago, who had 25 kills. He had 8 service aces, even though he had 8 service errors. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. And 3 of those service aces actually came in the fifth set, as he actually had 3 service aces in sequence in a row. So, man, that's just amazing. Jair Santiago, there's a lot of debate on who is the face of the NVA. It's either Felix Chapman, Jair Santiago, Jalen Penrose, Joe Norman. The list goes on and on. That's kind of the biggest debate of all debates in the NVA. Who is the face of the NVA? As for the Stunners, Spencer Olivier led the way with 15 kills. Shane Beamer had 10 kills. Tanner Woods, 9 kills. Calvin Sanborn, who was brought off the bench, he had 7 kills. That's actually not his primary position. I mean, he does play outside hitter, but he normally comes in as a serving specialist. But now he got to flourish and play outside hitter, play a little bit of right side. So, yeah, that's how the Stunners basically wound up losing to the Pythons. Now, this loss didn't really mean much, as, like I said, the Stunners were locked in as the 2 seed. But it did mean that they were not going to get a share of the National Conference. But regardless, the Texas Tyrants were the top seed of the conference, and they basically win the National Conference outright. So that's basically how the Texas Tyrants won the National Conference. Good job to them. So that is that for the NVA. after lots of upside down, inside out, all around events, yeah, that's it for the NVA regular season. Now we move on to the playoffs. Mike QC actually has a name for the Boston team, the Boston Bomb Squad. I don't think that name is actually going to fly because it has the word bomb in it. And I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I think referencing the Boston bombing would not be a good idea. I personally said the Boston Brigade. That would be my personal opinion on a Boston team name. So I think basically calling it the Boston Brigade or the Boston Bravehearts, if that's not taken already, I would say that is your Boston team name. But that is basically if the NVA will get expanded. But I don't know. But that will basically do it for the NVA. I know we had a lot of NVA to discuss, and I didn't really get to talk about the All-Star match. Long story short, the American Conference wound up winning the All-Star match, as they wound up winning in 5 sets. They took the first 2 sets. The National Conference took the next 2 sets, and then the American Conference took the 5th set. And yes, I agree, the NVA should expand, Carson. There should be more teams. There should be teams in Buffalo, the DMV. There should be teams that any big market team like Atlanta, maybe New Orleans, should get an NVA team. End of discussion. And Adam Karnick brought up the guy in the luchador mask, Jose Malero. He actually played for the national team, the Texas Tyrants. So for those that are new here, or for those that are first-time listeners, or for those that don't know what a Jose Malero is the fan favorite. He was the guy that had like a big serving run in last year's All-Star match. He even had a kill, which, for those that don't know, Jose Malero is a libero/defensive specialist. And honestly, I will say this. The fact that he got a kill was amazing. And then afterward, he just subbed himself out just to preserve that 1,000 hitting percentage. So that was definitely the highlight of the NVA All-Star match. He had a kill. And honestly, Jose Malero going up against big guys is just absolutely amazing. And thank you, JD, who has a Las Vegas Ramblers logo. He says, thankful to have a volleyball show to listen to. Hey, I'm glad to provide volleyball content. And I don't just talk NVA. I talk NCAA volleyball. I talk AVP, VNL. I talk a little high school volleyball, maybe some junior college volleyball, all sorts of things. All right, but that's going to do it for the NVA. Unless there's like some other NVA news that comes up, I probably won't be discussing NVA until maybe the week of the playoffs when I preview each match, and then I basically make my predictions on who's going to be winning it all. So we'll see. But on that note, let's actually I was going to actually go into the VNL, but we're actually going to take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, and I'll make this very brief, we'll talk VNL, and then we'll talk some AVP, then we'll talk some Big 12 volleyball in terms of the preseason polls. So let's keep it locked here. You're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, sports fans. It's me, your boy Larry B, and I want to walk you through the world of sports. No, not just the mainstream major TV deal type sports, although those are important too. But let me be your guide through your journey of all sports, from college to the pros, the minors, and everything in between. Each week, we are talking sports galore with true diehards just like you from a hardcore fan's perspective that's sure to quench your thirst around leagues you may know all too well and some you may even discover here. That's right, sports fans. If you love sports of all kinds, enjoy hearing amazing sports stories, and respect all sports, Because you know how difficult any of them can be to play or compete in, then this is your show. Join me, your boy Larry B, on the defining moment each week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports, and let the sports come to you.
Hello, ladies and sinners. Hello, sports fans around the world. Hello, IE Sports family. This is Cale Henderson, the host of IE Vegas, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio. If you folks are interested in sports in the Vegas area, if you're wanting to have a blast for 1 hour every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this is a show built for the Vegas sports fans, where we feature the Las Vegas Raiders, the Las Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Aces, and the University of Las Vegas, Nevada Rebels. Hopefully, fingers crossed, MLB team coming soon. Either way, if you folks are looking to have a blast for 1 hour each and every week, tune in Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you folks are interested in Vegas sports news, go to our Twitter, at SinCities_IESR, and you can speak with me, the host, Cale Henderson, at Cale_Henderson on Twitter. At any time, be happy to reply. Always want to reach out to our fans. Again, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernan, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here, IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
With segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Definitely check out all of our amazing shows, such as Chi-Town Weekly, which goes on 1 hour before this show comes on, as well as Sin City Sports with Cale Henderson, which talks all things Vegas sports, including a little bit of Las Vegas Ramblers. Also check out The Defining Moment, which went on earlier today at noonish Pacific time, where Larry B talked all things sports. He talked a lot of sports ranging from tennis, Wimbledon, to a little bit of NVA, to NBA Summer League, to the WNBA. The list went on and on. Also, I gotta give a shout out to JD in the chat room, in the live chat room. He says, thanks for your volleyball coverage. I appreciate you for tuning in live. Most people don't know that Set Point has a live chat room, and some people actually sometimes tune in on the podcast version, which if you do, awesome. But I appreciate those that do tune in live when it comes to Set Point on Spreaker. If you do tune in live. It costs nothing to basically make a account. You can tell your friends about it. That's basically how you're able to tune in on Spreaker on live. And I promise you I have guests as well. So if you have any other first-time listeners, I have guests on, and I try to make things as fun as possible. And like I said, I try to talk all things volleyball. I try not to leave any volleyball behind. But on that note, let's get on into the second half of Set Point. So let's discuss some VNL volleyball. Great repetitiveness, Teran. So VNL, on the men's side, this was the last week of the VNL, and some of the volleyball took place in the Philippines, and then some took place in Anaheim at the Anaheim Convention Center. So from where I'm at, the U.S. actually got to play in the Anaheim Convention Center, and I really want to go to the U.S.-Cuba match. The first match all of these matches actually started at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. So contrary to popular belief, they originally started at 6:30, but then I guess they shuffled their times and said, let's switch it to 8:30, just because why not? So the U.S. versus Cuba started on last Wednesday, and the U.S., despite facing a scrappy Cuba team, took care of them 27-25, 25-17, and 25-15. JD asks, are you based in SoCal? Yes, I am based in Southern California, which is why I'm most likely able to go to a lot of these NVA events. So for the U.S., they handled Cuba, and honestly, I kind of figured they would handle Cuba. Cuba isn't really on top of the world in terms of the standings, so I had a feeling that the U.S. was going to handle them. I really wanted to go to this event, go to that match, but sadly, I just couldn't. Then on Friday, July 7th, the same night that the NVA had its first night of event number 5, the U.S. took on Argentina, and this was a barn burner of a match. So Argentina took the first set 25-18, but then the U.S. took the second set 25-23, and then they took the third set 25-23, and oh boy, the fourth set was probably the longest set. This set should have probably counted for 2 sets, as this set actually made history in the VNL for being the longest set in VNL history, and eventually it was won by Argentina, having won 43-41, as there was lots of service errors, lots of blocks, lots of kills, lots of errors, but at the end, Argentina wound up winning it 43-41 off of a block at the net, and that's just the worst way to lose that set if you're the U.S., especially when you have multiple chances to basically close the match. So the two teams have to go to a 5th set, and then eventually Argentina manages to win that 5th set 15-12. And I can't really blame the U.S. too much, just because, well, you lost a 4th set 43-41. I've seen a score like that in junior college volleyball. But unfortunately for the U.S., for their sake, they just got punched in the mouth, and they just couldn't recover. And Argentina was in the top 8, and they wanted to improve their seeding. So it was a barn burner, and I really wish I could have, if I wasn't so busy, I maybe, hence the word maybe, could have tried to convince some of my NVA buddies to maybe go to this match. But everyone just really wanted to go back to the hotel and call it a night. And same with me. So, honestly, for the U.S., it was that tough of a loss. It was that tough of a loss. And they were so fatigued, it kind of carried over into the next match on last Saturday against France, the reigning VNL champion. And this was actually a rematch of last year's VNL final. But the U.S. took care of business despite being extremely fatigued, as U.S. wound up winning 25-23, 27-25, and 27-25, as the U.S., despite battling so much fatigue, their players even were saying, I was so tired after last night's match, I was so gassed and whatnot. I'm just paraphrasing, by the way. Yeah, they wound up beating France, which France actually had a chance to basically punch their their ticket into the top 8. But sadly, that was not the case. And Mikey Two Guns, or Mike C, is really chomping at the bits for me talking about US-Bulgaria. All right, I will talk about US-Bulgaria because that is actually the next match for the US. So, long story short for the US, this was their last match of the VNL pool play. Before I get into that, however, this match at first it didn't look like it was going to be a dramatic match, and then they actually got a little bit of help from some of their other so-called friends. So Japan, you got to remember, was atop the VNL standings in pool play. Japan had some pretty tough matchups this week. They had China, Netherlands, Italy, and Poland. They beat China in 5 sets in their first match. They actually played in the Philippines, so they did not play in Anaheim. And then on Friday, they beat Netherlands in 4. Then on Saturday, that's kind of when the first domino went down for Japan. They wound up losing to Italy in 4 sets. Now, I don't know if Italy has that same young team that it had in the first round of pool play, but that is a little surprising. And then the following day, or the last day of pool play, or the last match of pool play, Japan got swept by Poland. Now, Poland was right on the coattails of Japan in terms of the standings. And Poland could, hence the word could, have drawn a little bit closer to Japan in terms of the standings and maybe improved their seeding. And they actually did so. However, Poland didn't really jump Japan. They just finished 3rd. But now, jumping back to the U.S., it was all on the U.S. versus Bulgaria. The U.S., if they were to win, they'd be the top seed in the knockout round of the VNL Championships. Some people call it the VNL Finals, but I just call it the knockout round or the top 8. I don't call it championships because championships is basically the last 2 teams standing. I don't know about you all, but I just call it the knockout round or the single elimination round. I don't really like to call it the championships or the finals. I don't know about you all, but I'm just that type of guy. Anyway, so now for US-Bulgaria, just because Mikey C is probably at the edge of his seat. So I actually arrived to this match a little bit late in the first set. And I do need to give a shout out to Russell Holmes, the former USA men's volleyball player, and the do-it-all man for the Utah Stingers for hooking me up with a ticket. The funny thing is that I actually asked him in a jokingly manner and said, "Can you hook me up with a ticket by chance?" Because he was a former U.S. men's volleyball player, and I thought he would get tickets for free, just because he's a lifetime player. The dude should get tickets for free. You can't if you're a former player and you have to buy tickets, that's a no-no right there. So eventually, Russell Holmes told me, "I hooked you up with a ticket." Thank you, Russell Holmes. If you're somehow listening to this, I really do appreciate you getting me a ticket. Anyway, so US-Bulgaria. So I arrived pretty much in the later stages of the first set, and the US was down against Bulgaria. I think they were down 23-20, or at least 22-19, and eventually the US clawed their way back. They had 3 straight blocks, and they dodged a couple of set point opportunities against Bulgaria, and eventually they closed the first set by taking it 27-25, 29-27. I wasn't looking at the score. They took it 29-27 off of a kill from Matt Anderson, and I was just flabbergasted. First of all, the crowd was quite amazing, and it wasn't filled to the brim, but it was just electric. And my seats weren't too bad either. I was behind the bench, but it's pretty good. It beats being in the nosebleed section, that's for sure. But honestly, it was quite astounding if you ask me. I really loved being at this match. And then the second set, the U.S. kind of kept their momentum going. They kind of needed a little bit of mojo following that first set, but they wound up winning the second set 25-19, and then they were up 2-0. I gotta also say that if Bulgaria had lost, they could have been relegated, which I also should mention that Bulgaria did not have Alex Nikolov, the former Long Beach State men's volleyball standout, who won Freshman of the Year and Player of the Year back when he was at Long Beach State. I actually had to ask around and say, well, does Alex Nikolov play for this team? He actually plays for another Bulgaria men's national team, and he doesn't play for this one. So there you go. For those that are wondering that if Alex Nikolov plays for this team, no, he doesn't. And then in the third set, the U.S. kind of picked up where they left off, though Bulgaria kind of battled them in that third set, but the U.S. kind of eventually picked up steam when it truly mattered most, and then they eventually ended the match off of a monster block from Micah Ma. They took the third set 25-21, even though Bulgaria tried to challenge it, and eventually that was the match. The U.S. tied for first, but because they had more points than Japan and Poland, they were finished first in pool play, as the U.S. is the top seed in the VNL, as they will be taking on France in the knockout round. And I'm going to call it the knockout round. I do not care what anyone says. It's the knockout round. Nobody's going to tell me otherwise. Do not judge me. Anyway, so U.S. is playing France in the knockout round, while Japan is playing Slovenia. Poland, the host team in the knockout round, is playing Brazil, and Italy is playing Argentina. Those are some pretty darn good matchups at a glance. And honestly, I really am looking forward to those matchups. Even the U.S. versus France matchup, that's a rematch of last year's final in the VNL men's side. That's going to be a very good matchup, and I really can't wait for that. But I'm going to properly preview that next week. Let's preview the women's side of things. So the VNL on the women's side, in terms of I hate how they use the word VNL finals. It's the top 8 or the quarterfinals or anything that's not VNL finals. It's going to be called the quarterfinals or the top 8 or anything of that sort. Please don't call it VNL finals. I'm just going to also say this. VNL, please change it to like quarterfinals or top 8 or knockout round. Please stop calling it finals. Por favor. Maybe it's just me, but I don't know, bro. Anyway, so the VNL quarterfinals start on Wednesday as Poland plays Germany and the U.S. plays Japan. And JD says, VBTV, sadly, it's not free. Yeah, it's not free. And Mikey C says, I wish the matches were televised. Yeah, I totally agree. Volleyball TV sadly does not televise them for free. It's a subscription-based, and this is why I don't get it. It's like the Big Ten Network and all these other networks that you have to buy. Anyway, so back to the women's side of things. The quarterfinals start on Wednesday with Poland, Germany, and then U.S. versus Japan. So U.S.-Japan, this is me being a little biased, is probably the most interesting matchup of maybe the 4 quarterfinals. Just because Japan did beat the U.S. in 5 sets, and it's one of the 2 losses for the U.S., the other being against China. But I will just say this. I think the U.S. might be a little bit better, but as long as that match does not go 5 sets, I think the U.S. is fine. But it's so tough to really tell what Japan is. Japan can be a bit of an anomaly. Sometimes they play their worst match, and then sometimes they can play their best match. And then for the U.S., they have a mixed bag of veteran talent, and then they have inexperienced youth. But sometimes they have lots of talent that's young, but they just lack the experience, if that kind of makes sense. And then for Poland, Germany, I'll say this. I think that's a somewhat underrated matchup in a sense, just because, Poland is not bad. I think they're one of the more improved teams. And Germany, I think, is drastically improved just because I don't think anybody predicted them to being as good as, the other teams. I don't think anyone had Germany on their bingo card being in the top 8 or being truly great. I mean, Germany just barely snuck into the top 8, but I will say this, Germany, they're 7-5. They kind of separated themselves from Serbia, and Serbia just barely missed out, and they won't be defending their VNL crown. By the way, these are going to be played, this whole VNL Finals is going to be played in Texas, Arlington, Texas. So if you're in the Arlington, Texas area, you are to support, no questions asked. Anyway, so Poland, Germany, while it is 1 versus 8, I think it's kind of a good matchup. You just can't underestimate Germany. I mean, look at what the U.S. did with Serbia. Serbia wound up beating the U.S., and then Serbia wound up running the table and beating everybody and winning the VNL on the women's side. And then on July 13th, Thursday, you've got Brazil versus China, and then you've also got Italy versus Turkey. Now, Turkey, I think, is probably I wouldn't say the dark horse to win it all, but I really think they're a team that is just oozing with talent. Italy, I think, is also oozing with talent. Brazil, I don't want to say they're not going to win, but they did lose one of their top players, if I'm not mistaken. I forget her name. I think it's like Anna Patricia or something. But either way, losing one of their top players does not means that they're not going to be the same. And then they have to face the China team, which just beat the U.S., and they're riding a whole lot of momentum. So if there's any way that Brazil can beat China, and that 4 versus 5 matchup is so tough to get over the hump over. And Brazil is, and looking at Brazil versus China, their set win-loss ratio is so close, and Brazil and China don't have much separating for them. They've got the same record, about the same number of points. It's so tight and so close with one another. And then Turkey and Italy, like I said, both those teams are oozing with talent. I feel Turkey, I think, is playing some of their better volleyball. I'm not trying to say Turkey is way better than Italy. I think Italy can also pull an upset if they're playing their cards right. But I feel Turkey on paper is the better team. And thank you, JD. He says, very enjoyable show. I appreciate you. So the only matchup I can't really predict in terms of the quarterfinals is USA-Japan and Brazil-China. I feel Poland is the safe pick against Germany, and I feel China might be the safe pick against Brazil. Now, you just can't underestimate Brazil just because they do have Julia Bergman, who is just basically, she's really adapting well following graduating from Georgia Tech. And I think Julia Bergman is the best thing for the Brazilian team. All they're missing is Mariana Brambilla, and then that team is probably the best thing since, heck, Georgia Tech back when they made the Elite Eight. So we'll see. But that U.S.-Japan matchup, that can be very dicey, especially if the U.S. is not on their A game. And then Turkey-Italy, Turkey-Italy, I think is kind of a little bit tough as well. I just think that the U.S.-Japan is probably the toughest matchup. So we'll see. And then, yeah, I think that's the toughest match to predict. I think I'm totally confident picking Turkey over Italy. I'm confident picking China over Brazil. And I'm confident picking Poland over Germany. I mean, if I had to be put on the spot, I'm biased for saying this, but I'd probably pick U.S. over Japan in like 5. But we'll see. And then Poland, China in the semifinals, and then let's say U.S., Turkey in the semifinals. I don't know. I'd probably say Poland. Probably Poland. That sounds about right. And then U.S., Turkey. Oh, that's so tough. I want to say the U.S., but Turkey is also really good. Turkey, like I said, they're oozing with talent. I can't just say Turkey. I just can't say the U.S. just because I live here. But I'll say the US in 5, just because all those 5-set matches have kind of really come in handy for them, in a sense. But do not underestimate Turkey. Turkey is probably the dark horse to win it all. And then US-Poland in the final, that's my pick. I am not going to be making a prediction for that. You are not getting a finals prediction from me. So, yeah, I'm not making a finals prediction. I'm just going to pick my projected final is going to be Poland-US. If I'm wrong, I will eat my crow. But my finals prediction is on the women's side is Poland-US. There you go. All right, so that is that for US versus Poland in terms of the women's side. Like I said, quarterfinals start on Wednesday with the US versus Japan as well as Poland versus Germany. And then the day after, you've got Turkey, Italy, and Brazil, China. And then the semifinals are the day after. And then the finals and third place match are on Saturday. All right, so that is that for the VNL on the men's and women's side. I'll save the men's side for next week just because that sounds more proper to give in terms of previews. All right, so let's jump on over to some AVP because there was not one, but 2 AVP tournaments going on this past week I almost forgot that the Waupaca tournament was a thing, and I didn't really mean to forget about it last week. So I will say this, the winner of that tournament, and I did make note of this on the Set Point Twitter. It was, and for those that don't follow me on Twitter, it's at @set_point_IE. The one that won on the men's side was Cody Caldwell and Sean Cook. Now, those were the 2 names I made note of on Twitter. They beat Adam Roberts and Jeffrey Samuels in the finals. And then on the women's side, Kylie DeBerg and Ilana Chacon defeated Chloe Loreen and Natalie Robinson in the final, on the women's final. And then, now those 2 were also another pair of names that I made note of, as Kylie DeBerg is a former Missouri and LSU standout, and Ilana Chacon is actually the older sister of Morgan Chacon and... how am I blanking on the other Chacon? She plays at Long Beach State. Either way, she's the oldest of the Chacon sisters, and I'm probably gonna come across the other Chacon sister that currently plays at Long Beach State. I should know that just because, I cover Long Beach State volleyball all over the place. But anyway, Ilana Chacon is a Florida State women's volleyball player, played indoor and beach volleyball. So there you have it. And those 2 basically wound up winning the Waupaca tournament. I hate how both of those tournaments kind of got lumped. How that tournament kind of got lumped on the same week as the Hermosa Beach Open, just because, the Hermosa Beach Open is kind of the bigger deal of the 2, just because the Hermosa Beach Open is kind of what originated the AVP and whatnot. Not that Waupaca isn't a big deal, it's just that Waupaca, some people kind of think that Waupaca is a little bit random and whatnot. But Waupaca definitely has its respects, and honestly, the Waupaca Open did not disappoint, and I think Waupaca Open is really good. Yes. Yes, indeed. So, overall, Ilana Chacon. Yeah, she's the oldest of the Chacon sisters, which I'm trying to find the youngest one. Savannah Chacon. Savannah Chacon. I should know that because, again, I cover Long Beach State women's volleyball. I should know Savannah Chacon, and I covered Morgan back last year before she went back to Florida State. So, yeah, there you go. All right, but that is basically the Waupaca Open and whatnot. Now for the Hermosa Beach Open, and honestly, the Hermosa Beach Open, let me just tell you, there was a lot of dramatics in this tournament. The 1 seeds and the top seeds were getting upset, not just in the first round, but in the second round too. Brooke Bauer and Katie Horton upset the top seed Haley Harward and Kelly Kolinsky in the second round. And then the first round, Macy Jerger and there was one girl, Megan Rice. There are 2 Megan Rices in this tournament, and one of them is from Redondo Beach. The other is not from Redondo Beach. But Macy Jerger and Megan Rice upset Katie Dickens and Jennifer Ketty in the first round. And then the other Megan Rice, Megan J. Rice, who is from Redondo Beach, a.k.a. South Beach, along with Savvy Simo, upset the number 4 seed, Larissa Maestrini and Lily Maestrini in the first round. So a lot of seeds were getting upset. Top seeds were getting upset. And then this isn't really a big upset, but Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn upset Zana Muno and Deanna Kraft. So, yeah. Woo! The only pair in terms of the top 4 seeds basically to advance out of day 1 without a loss was Megan Kraft and Emily Stockman. Man, that is good. That's just good on Emily and Megan. That's just crazy. But there were lots of upsets. And the one that really took me by surprise was Megan Rice and Savvy Simo. They were a 13th seed, and they wound up basically going all the way to the final. And it was just so surprising. And what was even more surprising was the 14th seed, Lexi Denneberg and Carly Can. They made it all the way through the contenders bracket, which included upsetting Haley Harward and Kelly Kolinsky. And they made it all the way to the semifinals, because you could lose once in AVP play, so long as it's not on the qualifier day. But if you lose once through day 1, and then you make your way through the contenders bracket and make it to the semifinals, you basically can still win the tournament. And yes, this is beach volleyball. This is AVP. But Lexi Denneberg and Carly Can were beaten by Megan J. Rice and Savvy Simo in the semifinals. Meanwhile, in the other semifinal, Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn took down Maddie Anderson and Molly Turner, which Maddie Anderson and Molly Turner are actually a good story. If you all remember, they were actually the pair that made it through the qualifiers of the Huntington Beach Open, and then they lost on Championship Sunday in the quote-unquote quarterfinals, and they eventually basically wound up finishing tied for 5th. So in the final of the Hermosa Beach Open, Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn, or as their fans like to call them, Quigglehorn, they actually wound up, I wouldn't say making the South Beach fans sad, but they beat Megan J. Rice and Savvy Simo in the final 21-15 to 21-16, which part of me was kind of hoping Megan J. Rice was going to pull out the win, just because I think it would have been great to see a hometown hero pulling off the win, just because I don't think she's even won an AVP tournament. I want to say Savvy Simo hasn't won one either, but honestly, it would have there's a first time for everything. I know Schermerhorn, I know one of the two, Schermerhorn or Quiggle, is like a AVP veteran, but the two have had AVP experience. So I'm not trying to say that Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn winning is boring, but I will say it would have been awesome to see a South Beach native winning the Hermosa Beach Open. But alas, them getting to the finals is pretty good, so that's pretty nice. So, good job to Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn as they win the AVP's Hermosa Beach Open. It was very impressive on their part. Now, jumping over to the men's side, so I wouldn't say there was too many upsets, but in the semifinals, there was basically 3 of the top 4 seeds advanced to the semifinals. The only ones that didn't make it was the 4 seed, which, Chase Budinger and his partner, Miles Evans, it wasn't ultimately surprising considering Billy Allen and Allison Cerruti. They're both good. They've won an AVP tournament this year, and they made it to the finals of an AVP tournament previously. That is no upset. I don't think there's any problem losing to a pair like that. So, yeah. So, in the semifinals, Taylor Crabb and Taylor Sander, or as I call them, Team Taylor, took down Tri Bourne and Kame Schalk in 3 sets, which, that was probably a barn burner right there. 17-21, 22-20, and 15-12. And then the other semifinal, Trevor Crabb and Theo Brunner took down Billy Allen and Allison Cerruti, which denied them of a 3rd straight AVP Finals appearance, 21-17 and 21-19. And then in the final, we had ourselves a crab broiler. Yes, that is actually the actual name of a crab versus crab rivalry. The Taylor Crabb versus Trevor Crabb rivalry. It's called Crab Broiler. So, no, I was not at the Hermosa Beach Open. I was basically at the final day. I was basically at the, whatchamacallit, the NVA's Event 5. So, for the Hermosa Beach Open final, it was basically Taylor Crabb and Taylor Sander taking on Theo Brunner and Trevor Crabb. So, the first set, Taylor Crabb and Taylor Sander took the first set 21-19. Second set, Brunner and Crabb took that set 21-13. And then in the final set, Brunner and Crabb took it 15-10. And honestly, it was quite nice. It was a very barn burner-like match. I felt that was probably the most amazing, I would say amazing final, but it was probably the final that most people wanted to see. They wanted to see a Crabb versus Crabb final. Which I understand, but honestly, I would also say, it could have also been great to see Billy Allen and Allison Cerruti making a 3rd straight AVP Finals appearance. But you also got to remember that most of the opponents that played in the AVP tournaments that Allen and Cerruti played in weren't really like the true big time names. Like they didn't see either the Crabs or they didn't see Kame Schalk or like Phil Dalhouser, Avery Drost. Like they didn't see those guys and whatnot. So the list goes on and on. So unfortunately, and Tri Bourne, Kame Schalk, the list goes on and on. They didn't really see those big time names. Not trying to say that those finals appearances weren't deserving, but it comes to a point where it doesn't really, it's not like you're kind of the big man on campus when it comes to that tournament. But I digress. Still, a 3rd place finish in the Hermosa Beach Open is pretty good, especially when you're seeded 12th. That's such a tough path, especially when you have to upset the 5th seed, Troy Field and Evan Corey in the first round. Like, that's already a tough, tall task as it is. And then you run into the 1 seed of a buzzsaw that is Tri Bourne and Kame Schalk in the quarterfinals of the winners bracket. Like, that's an even tougher task. So the fact that they even placed top 3, that's still pretty good. But that'll do it for the AVP's Hermosa Beach Open, which I think it was a very good tournament. I wish I could have gone to this tournament, but there was just so much volleyball happening. It was, like I said, put in the title, a Volleypalooza weekend. You had the NVA happening with Event 5. You had the last week of the VNL happening in Anaheim. You also had the Hermosa Beach Open. And then I guess you had the Waupaca Open, but that was actually before the weekend, which was a good nod on the AVP's part. Do not put 2 AVP tournaments in the same weekend. Just please don't. Anyway, so that's basically the entire Volleypalooza tournament. Volleypalooza weekend right there. So the AVP is back in action on August 4th and August 6th when they head down to the ATL when they head down for the Atlanta Open, and that is actually a big-time tournament, as that's actually the first Gold Series tournament, and that's kind of where there's more points at stake, and that there's probably more talent that's going to be oozing in that tournament. And JD says, I'm looking forward to the 2023 FIVB Women's Volleyball Nations League final round. I am too, and I can't wait for that as well. And back to the AVP, there's only 5 tournaments left in the AVP, as after the Atlanta Open, you've got the Manhattan Beach Open. That's the granddaddy of them all. I might try to go to that one, but it's still up in the air. And then you've got the Chicago Open, which is on September 1st and 3rd. And then you've got the Championships, which doesn't have a location. Good job, AVP. And then their last tournament is actually the Laguna Beach Open on October 13th through 15th, which I plan on being there. All right, that's enough for the AVP portion of the show. I actually do want to give my thoughts on the VNL coming to Anaheim and what it meant having the VNL in Anaheim. First of all, I really loved going to the USA-Bulgaria match. It was awesome. I will say the crowd was electric, and like I said, my seats were not bad. I wish I could have gone to more matches. I really would have liked to go to the Cuba match. I really would have liked to have had a media pass. I don't know how I could get like VNL media passes. It's probably like gonna cost me like a tooth, an arm, and maybe one of my toes. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But anyway, me attending a VNL match or a USA men's volleyball match was amazing. And honestly, I'm glad I attended. And heck, I'm glad I even asked, because heck, I jokingly asked that to Russ just because, again, I thought he was going to get in for free, and then maybe he could hook me up with one on the off chance. But eventually, at first he said no, he wasn't going to be able to just because he had to buy a ticket, which I think is silly just because he's a former player. He should be able to get in for free. He should have a lifetime pass. But I digress. But this experience was awesome, not just for fans, but for like viewers as well. And for people that live in Southern California, this is just amazing. This is how you grow the game of volleyball. So for the VNL, I will say this, dear VNL, please have the VNL come back to the Anaheim Convention Center, not just for the men's side of things, but for the women's side as well. You would be doing everyone a huge favor in terms of growing the game. So, thank you, Carson. Former players should never have to pay, in my humble opinion. Facts. Thank you. Comment of the day right there. But, dear VNL, please come back to the Anaheim Convention Center. Heck, maybe even have it at like the Bren Event Center or the Pyramid, if there's enough space. I mean, maybe not the Pyramid or the Bren, maybe Anaheim Convention Center if you're unable to fill seats, or if you need more seats. I don't know how much the Bren or the Pyramid can fill, even though I've been to both of those facilities. But honestly, please come back to Southern California, VNL. California is one of the hotbeds in terms of volleyball. Same with, like, I know Texas is as well, and that's good that the VNL is having the final, women's final in Texas. But I think also having the VNL back in Southern California would also be a big favor for people like myself. Just my opinion. I know I'm biased when I say that just because I'm from Southern California, but I don't know. I just think that it would be so beneficial for everyone to basically have this access, to seeing this event. Yes, it's going to cost money, but it's going to cost money for a subscription. And honestly, I am the guy who wants to see volleyball matches in person. I am an in-person guy. I'd want to see matches in person. I'm not the biggest person who likes to see things on TV. If it has to come to it, then so be it. I'll see things on TV, especially if it's national TV. But if it comes down to me having access to going in person, you bet your sweet bippy I'm going to go to this volleyball match in person. Anyway, so I hope the VNL does come back in person. I really, 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 really would like it. I'm 99% certain the VNL will come back in Anaheim, just because if this was a big success, which I'm sure it was, they're going to come back, and we'll see what happens going forward. All right, but that's that for my thoughts and opinions on the VNL having their matches in Anaheim at the Anaheim Convention Center. So lastly, we're going to close out the show by discussing the Big 12 women's volleyball conference polls or preseason. So honestly, this is no surprise, as when I first saw the coaches poll, I'm like, well, it's official. We're getting closer and closer to women's volleyball season. And the first team, the top team who has basically garnered so many first-place votes, and the team that's going to be the favorite to winning the Big 12 is none other than Texas, the reigning NCAA women's volleyball champion. They garnered 12 first-place votes, and they have 144 points. Second place is BYU, who had one first-place vote and had 125 points. I bet you that first-place vote was from Texas, just because I don't think Texas can vote for themselves. So Baylor was third, a very close third, with 123 points. TCU was fourth with 106 points. Kansas is fifth with 105 points. Houston was sixth with 91 points. Iowa State was seventh with 81 points. Kansas State, I like how they put K-State instead of Kansas State. Talk about lazy. Kansas State is eighth, or was picked to finish eighth with 63 points. UCF was picked to finish ninth with 59 points. Oklahoma 10th, 45 points. Texas Tech 11th with 37 points. Cincinnati 12th with 23 points. And West Virginia is bringing up the rear with 20 points. And there is no Oklahoma State women's volleyball, so sadly there is no Oklahoma State. So I'm just going to say a couple things. First of all, there's no surprise that Texas is chosen to finish first. Second of all, 2 through 6, I think, is going to be duking it out for second place. BYU is one of the tougher places to win at, just because higher altitude and raucous crowd and fan base. It is very, 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 very tough to win at in terms of gymnasiums and road facilities. So I think BYU can contend for second place in the Big 12. My question is, can they beat the likes of Baylor, maybe Kansas? TCU showed a lot of chops last year. Houston showed really good chops last year, especially in the NCAA tournament, though they didn't really have to play Creighton, who got upset by Auburn. Iowa State, I don't know, will look good like last year. They were the one team that from the Big 12 that beat Texas. K-State, I hate to disappoint my good friend Steve Astor. I'm not ultimately sold on them. Now, UCF, this is the second thing for me. Why is UCF ninth? UCF has always had a good team. I think UCF is ranked way too low, and I said this on the Set Point Twitter. UCF is going to finish a lot higher than ninth. I think I would have put UCF at like maybe 7th, maybe 5th. I maybe would have put them ahead of like Houston, if not behind Houston. So, I don't know. Putting UCF at 9th was very head-scratching. And even UCF's Twitter made a video of it, and I already could tell that video screamed, and that's when I took that personally. So, I think UCF is circling every Big Ten match on their schedule. So, I can already tell UCF is excited for Big 12 conference play, because you have to remember, UCF is part of the Big 12, as well as Houston and BYU and Cincinnati, who are all newcomers of the conference after transitioning in their previous conferences. And yes, the show is on Spotify, if I'm not mistaken. This show also has a Linktree account, which is in the description on Twitter. But as for the Big 12 women's volleyball coaches polls, no doubt Texas is probably going to win it, unless, of course, they suddenly play some of their worst volleyball, which is not going to happen. Because Jared Elliott's squad is just too good, and they have a lot of returning players. And even though they don't return Logan Eggleston, they've got quite a number of returning players, like Maddie Skinner, Asia O'Neal, who's got a lot of experience playing for the U.S. women's national team in the VNL, and then the list goes on in terms of their newcomers and their returning players. So, my goodness, Texas is going to be a legit contender. Like, Texas and Stanford, I think, are two good teams that I think can contend. Pitt can also contend as well. Maybe Louisville, maybe. You also have got the Big Ten with Wisconsin. Penn State looks really, really, really good. Hawaii, that's kind of a dark horse in terms of non-Power 5 conference teams. That looks really good. San Diego might be good, but I'll save more of the NCAA women's volleyball talk for when the NCAA women's volleyball season rolls around. But that's going to do it for the Big 12 women's volleyball talk. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. It is that time for me to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I appreciate you. Timestamps will be added if you are listening live. And if you're listening on the playback, disregard this message. Shout out to the chat room. You are awesome. Mikey, Two Guns, a.k.a. Mike C, Larry B, and we had Mike Pack and Adam Warren popping into the chat room. Also, the newcomers, JD with the Las Vegas Ramblers logo, as well as Carson, for popping into the chat room. I really do appreciate you two tuning in for the first time. It really means a lot that you two tuned in. Thank you for discovering the show, and hopefully we will have you back in the near future. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. Have yourself a great rest of the week. Enjoy the volleyball action. Enjoy the VNL on the women's side. If you're in the Texas, Arlington area, please support them. Please do yourself a favor and go to that event. I will see you all most likely Saturday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. That's probably the day I'm shooting to do that show, but we shall see. But until then, have yourself a great rest of the evening, and I will see you soon. Peace!